Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. Here, we aim to provide you with the experience, strength, and hope of professionals actively working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. The purpose of our show is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a disease with abstinence as the solution. Here, we talk about all things recovery. Most importantly, how to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, tell others about your change, and hopefully the message will spread.
On today's episode of Food Junkies Podcast, we are joined by Dr. Jen Unwin from the UK. Here she tells her personal and professional story, talks about the ongoing debate on food, sugar, carb addiction, and how she uses the GRIN method to work with clients. She and Vera even do a role play for you. I also want to announce Jen's book, Fork in the Road. It's out now. In this beautifully illustrated book, she teams up with top clinicians in the field to share what they have learned about freeing yourself from the emotional and physical dangers of overeating sugars, flours, and processed foods. The book leads you in a clear way through identifying if you have carbohydrate addiction, finding the motivation to change your life, understanding how to build the right daily eating plan, the strategies for long-term success, and where to go for more information and support. Welcome, Dr. Unwin.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Vera Tarman, co-host of the Food Junkies Podcast, along with Molly Painschab. Today, we are interviewing Dr. Jen Unwin, who is a consultant clinical health psychologist based in the UK. She is a fellow of the British Psychological Society and a former chair of the UK Association of Solution-Based Focused Practice. Dr. Unwin has worked for many years with the NHS, helping patients to achieve well-being despite their chronic illnesses. And last year, she retired and teamed up with her GP husband, Dr. David Unwin, to help people make healthier lifestyle choices, mainly in the low-carb community. Both Unwins are amongst the many experts in the dietdoctor.com website. In their recent work, the Unwins have come up with a couple of valuable clinical tools that we at Food Junkies find extremely useful in working with food addicts. The GRIN, G-R-I-N, and the Glycemic Index Postcard, both of which we will talk about today. But before we get to that, Dr. Unwin, can you please tell us a little bit about your own history, professional and personal, but not too much because we don't have that much time. But particularly, you quoted saying, when I look back, I've always been a carb and sugar addict. So why don't you start with that and lead into your positive aha moment?
Okay, yeah, definitely. Oh gosh, yes. I think like many of us, I just don't remember a time. I look back way back. I mean, my earliest memories are food memories, so that was obviously what was lighting up the neurons. Yeah, so looking back, that was always a thing. And also, I'm 100% sure my mum, she's not alive today, unfortunately, but she was definitely a sugar addict herself. So you kind of you pick that stuff up, don't you? But I think like we all think that probably you're just kind of born with this tendency, this special brain, as Bitten would say. And I think I definitely had that. There was certainly a couple of things that played into making it worse as a child. We had a couple of traumatic things happen in the family, which made the adults kind of absent, not through any fault of their own, but I think made me turn more to food as comfort, and it was always carby. I was always sneaking, as Bitten would say, sneaking in the kitchen, looking in the baking cupboard. I love baking as well. I love cooking. I just adored food, really. So it started very young, and then I think it gets more complicated when you get to be a teenager. And certainly back in the 80s, there weren't very many overweight people, but I was an overweight kid at a girls' school, and I was just about the only one in the class. So I think that has its effect on you. And then, of course, I started, and with my mum, the cycle of trying all the diets. And there were some really crazy diets in the 80s that some will remember. There was one that was to do with eggs and grapefruit. That was a classic, but there were many others, and we kind of tried them, and nothing much worked. And then on and off, I did some successful dieting. I got to a kind of happy with my weight quite often, white knuckling it, and then the weight would creep back on, and I just hadn't understood the kind of the core issue really until I would say I was about 48, so about 8 years ago when I first discovered low carb. Do you want me to talk about that? Yeah, so it was
your aha moment.
Yeah, my aha moment for low carb. I don't think that wasn't the whole story, but I was wandering around the supermarket one January, kind of thinking, need to start another diet. And there in the remainder bin was a book called Escape the Diet Trap. And it's written by a UK GP some years ago. And I thought, escape the diet trap, that's what I need to do. So I picked up this book, and lo and behold, it was a book about low carb. And I was kind of really interested in the science, because it wasn't a big book, but he simply wrote the science of low carb and insulin and fat burning and how all that works, and hunger. And it really made sense. So as is my kind of typical way of things in life, I jumped straight into it. I did the whole cold turkey thing. And as I'd been a lifelong carb eater, I didn't feel too great for a couple of weeks. I'm sure many people can identify with that. I just sort of sat in a chair and stared into a corner for about 2 weeks. But then I had this kind of miracle awakening after I think it was about 10 days. I felt amazing, and my brain was alive, and everything was in multicolour. And I kept rattling on to David about how marvellous it was, and reading him bits out of this book. And he was kind of poo-pooing it, as doctors did back in the day at that time. But he saw how well I did. And to me, it seemed, a way of eating really well, really healthily, but sustainably, and not being hungry, not having those kind of cravings. I kind of wobbled a bit over the years, and I think that's something we're going to talk about as well, wasn't it? What the sort of pitfalls. And I think that's to do with what we call carb creep now. When we talk to patients, it's that it just can creep back in, or this idea of just having a little bit when you've not really understood it's an addiction, or doing the whole keto baking thing is a disaster for us, isn't it? So that always ended badly.
We definitely have to touch on that carb creep and yes, absolutely. Yeah.
So that happened a bit, and then I would say about 4 years ago, I suddenly sort of I understood. I'd kind of heard some stuff, and I think I'd seen some stuff from Bitten, and it just clunked into place. Then, I'm definitely an addict. How can I have not seen that? I'm a psychologist. Oh my goodness, yeah. And then I really got it, and then from then it's been much easier in a way, understanding it in that way, and the logic of that, and then what you do when you've come to that conclusion. And so when I just retired a couple of years ago from the NHS, and just decided to dedicate my time to this mission now, and trying to help as many people as I can, really. And so that was an extension of the low carb work that I was already doing with David. We've been doing that for about 8 years. The addiction piece has sort of come, as I say, in the last 2 years since I've had time to devote myself to it. But we have been working with people with low carb and keto to help them cure all kinds of physical but also mental health challenges in his GP practice.
So it makes sense, your whole entire story. I mean, I think so many of us, especially today, we're like, ding, this is how we got there. Like, it starts out one way and then it just kind of evolves, and here we are. So, so then it evolves to now you're speaking at Low Carb USA Boca, just, last week, 2 weeks ago already. Yeah. Time flies. I'm not really sure anymore. But, in that, you talked about this topic of using low carbohydrate diet as a way to treat food addiction, and I was on that call. I watched the conversation happen with the questioning, and Dr. Robert Saives, carb addiction doc, jumps in there and starts challenging this term food addiction. Yeah. And you agreed with him a little bit, and I would have loved to see it talked about more. So here's our opportunity. What do you think this addiction should be called, and why? Like, is there specific research or nomenclature that supports one versus the other? What research do we need to support whatever it is you're in your opinion?
Yeah. Do you know, I keep going around a little bit in circles. I think it's a debate that we all need to have. And, I'd even be interested to hear what you got. There's a lot of people been working in this space much longer than I have. I think when you look in the literature, it says food addiction, doesn't it? So when you do the literature search for food addiction, some papers, sugar addiction, because when you say sugar addiction, people say, well, it isn't just sugar, which is kind of true, because, it can be these other sort of high carbohydrate foods. But then it kind of is true, because if you think, well, people have got a problem with bread or pasta, we know it's starch, and that's glucose molecules. Glucose is a sugar. So in a way, it's still sugar addiction. Food addiction seems a bit broad. I mean, I was kind of coming around to that. I thought I might get that question, and particularly because he would be on the call. And I had been thinking, well, yeah, carb addiction does capture it quite well, actually, because it is the sugars in the carbohydrate as well. And as Bitten says, those people who struggle with bread and those kinds of foods, sometimes it's even harder than when it's just cutting out the sugary foods. Yeah, so maybe carbohydrate, and even some of us that struggle with maybe nuts or dairy, I suppose you could still say, well, it's probably because it's that kind of fat carb combo, which is something that is particularly potent. So yeah, I don't know. Do you guys have thoughts on it?
Jen, why don't you, I'd be really interested in, this is my perspective, and give me your thoughts. I tend to, especially in my book, Food Junkies, talk about this as a continuum. So definitely it starts with sugar and refined carbs, for sure. But then as the progression continues, it then because it's gradual and progressive, and if the people are still eating badly and don't get off the train, as it were, it can then include things like grains and dairy and yes, still some sugar. Yes. But then it can move into the behaviors themselves, overeating of even healthy foods, because the dopamine adaptation is now, it's just the anticipation of food. Forget about sweet food. And so then we start to see anorexic and bulimic like behaviors that end stage. It's actually no longer about the sugar anymore, although it started that way. How does that sit with your understanding?
Yeah, no, it sits well. And that, as you say, that it becomes more of a process addiction the longer you go on, that it becomes so tied up with everything in life. This thing about, well, partly because of the dopamine piece, life sort of focuses down and down onto food and eating, and we start to neglect other activities or kind of reinforcing things that we might be doing. So yeah, so it comes to dominate the whole. It's more about eating. Yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah, so you'd be more of the food addiction camp.
Well, I would actually go with sugar addiction, because that's what people will listen to. That's what they'll relate to. But in the back room, in my clinical corridor, as it were, the umbrella is wide, and food would be more appropriate, because I see end stage. In the early days, like the internet and keto, you're seeing the beginning stages. I see the end when people are shut-ins, 400 pounds, have their Haagen-Dazs or their ice cream brought into them.
Delivered. Yeah.
Exactly. And so for me, that's food addiction.
Yeah, I think it's great to have these debates, and yeah, maybe Vera, you need to write a paper on that, maybe.
Okay. Right on.
Or somebody does.
Maybe Molly and Christy, because you guys are just fantastic. Okay, anyway, Molly, can we carry on to the next question?
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead.
I would really like it, Dr. Unwin, if you would speak to the GRIN, GRIN, Goals, Resources, Increments, Noticing model, and how that can, first of all, if you can just give a thumbnail description, and then how that might be used in the food addiction world.
Yes, absolutely. So when I started working with David, obviously GPs are incredibly busy. Like, he has sort of 5-10 minute appointments with people to try and sort of make a difference. So it's incredibly difficult. My background, yeah, it's really, really tough. My background therapeutically was, I was kind of trained traditionally, as many therapists are, into CBT and the more traditional therapies. But I worked in a large hospital here in the northwest of the UK for a while with the plastic surgeons, and we had people coming from all over, and we didn't have them for long because they would be discharged home. So you had to kind of, it became less about doing therapy and more about sort of trying to quickly get to people's kind of hopes and motivation, and get some sense of how they were they going to be okay or not, really. And also I noticed, working in a big hospital, that, oftentimes people would have these terrible things going on in their lives, but the vast majority of them would actually cope really well. Some people would need some help, but, maybe 10 or 20% of people would struggle. So, what were the other 80% doing? And I started thinking about that. I started being interested in positive psychology, and particularly hope. I think hope is is so central, and we need a way of understanding that, and we need a way of facilitating that in healthcare or in any helping encounter. We need to understand people's hopes and kind of be able to enhance that. So that was how it started for me. So I trained in solution-focused brief therapy then, because that seemed to really, really fit. The model is all about hope, really. It's about what people's best hopes are for having a conversation with you, and starting at that point. That enhances their motivation, if you like, for change, for doing something different. But it's all about their agenda, really, and uncovering. It's philosophically a very different thing from traditional interactions, because it assumes that the person themselves already has the means to make those changes. You're just asking questions to uncover their competence, and you just trust that they know that and they're going to move in the right direction if you have that kind of conversation. And so it's a lovely, lovely way to work, and takes a lot of burden off practitioners, particularly when you're working in that sort of fast-paced, stressful environment. So I trained in that. And so I was trying to kind of get the ideas over to David in a way that he could use in his 10-minute or, however long appointments, and also that we could pass on to, say, the nurses or other doctors who were wanting to do this work, because it's all about behaviour change, isn't it? It is all about people doing something different and being motivated to try that. Yeah, so it's informed very much by solution-focused brief therapy thinking, and also by positive psychology findings. And GRIN stands for goals, which is always the first step. You have to start with what are the person's best hopes for coming to talk to you. What are their personal goals? And one of my favourite ever colleagues used to say, it's a long day on the golf course if you don't know where the hole is. And really that just gets across this lovely idea that you're kind of both batting in the same direction. You know where you're going, you know what success is going to look like for that person. And just the act of asking that sort of question is remarkable, because sometimes you never know what you're going to hear, number one. Number two, you just learn fantastic, amazing things about the person's values and aspirations and hopes. And sometimes they're very kind of humble things that people want, actually. So they're not sort of pie in the sky, if I can use that slightly inappropriate terminology. Yeah, so it's always about starting the conversation about, what are your best hopes for us talking today? Or, if in 6 months' time you look back and this was the day, this was the aha day, and everything's so much better. Tell me about what's going on in your life in that kind of 6 months forward time frame. So that's the kind of goal-based bit of the conversation. And R is the next bit. It's about people's resources. So we often forget that people come with incredible competence. And I think this really sits well, actually, with food addiction work, is that, most of us, I think you even said it on one of the podcasts recently, is that, we're kind of really competent in all areas of our lives, apart from this one area where there's sort of carnage going on with the food. So, but it really helps to understand people's resources and who's around for them and what's worked in the past. Like, problems are never static. There's always exceptions to problems. There's always times, like I had times in my life where things were much better, actually. And what was that about? And you can discover quite a lot by asking questions about when things have gone well in the past, or what people's strengths are, because you can, they're going to use that in getting to where they want to be. So that's the result, and who's around, kind of what's going on in people's lives. That's really important. We find that certainly in the groups that we run, we ask people to bring, significant others, if other people are doing the cooking or whatever, who's around supporting them. I is for increments, little signs of change. What would they be looking for? So if this life where they're not struggling with food and sugar that they've described to you as their goal and their best hopes, and you try and get a really rich description of that, if that's their sort of 10 out of 10 moment, if they get there, that's going to be complete success. And 0 is the worst they've been, or, where none of that is present. Then you can ask a bit about, where are you now? And some people say 0, obviously, and that's fine. Most people usually have something to say, usually say 3, actually. I don't know why it's human nature to mostly say 3 or 4. And then you can ask about, what's already working? What makes it that? What makes you say 3? And people might say, I'm already I'm already, going for a nice walk every day with my friend, or I take my lunch to work. I make a proper lunch and take it to work. I'm not eating in the canteen anymore. I've already made that change. So there's always something kind of already going. And then I is the next little bit. You'd ask about, well, if you're saying 3 now, if I saw you in a couple of weeks' time and you were saying 4, what would you be doing that would tell you it was 4? Or what would you have noticed that would tell you that you were 4? And what you'll notice about that question is it's not how did you get to 4, which is a kind of doing thing. It's what would you notice? And then N, the end of GRIN, N is for noticing, because that's just so incredibly important. And that's for the doctor or the practitioner as well as the person. A relentless paying of attention to signs of things being more like they want them to be, and when that happens and what are the circumstances of that, and celebrating those small changes, really noticing. Because in healthcare what we do is we tend to notice symptoms or problems, or we kind of focus on what's not going so well, and as human beings we do that as well. We tend to notice what we've not done rather than what we've done, and sort of celebrate those moments really. So, and then that becomes a sort of ongoing process that you can do a little bit in each appointment. So usually you first, like say for David, his first appointment when he met someone would be around, what are your best hopes for us talking? Maybe some idea of who's around and what they've done well in the past. And maybe an idea of when we next meet, what would you like to notice? And then just keep going with those sort of questions and that process. And it's like magic, solution focused. You have to try it to believe it, but it is like magic.
Since you said it was a 5 or 10 minute, it fits within a 5 or 10 minute interview. Is there any chance we could just do a little example of it right now? I can. Of course. I'm a patient and I've just had a relapse, and let's see it in.
Yes, I'm going to do it. Right.
Okay.
Hi.
Great.
Thanks for coming in today.
Yeah. I was doing so well and I relapsed. Because it's nighttime. I can't stand the night. And I woke up, it was 4 a.m. The food was calling, and I ended up relapsing.
Wow. Okay. Well, great that you've come in. What are your best hopes for us talking today? What do you think would...
Oh God. Well, I think I'm okay, but what happens about tomorrow or tonight at 4 a.m? Like I'm okay now, but now I feel like I've lost my confidence, and I'm afraid of waking up in the middle of the night.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me about a time when you woke up in the night and you were able to not eat, or have you had a time like that, or a better night?
Yeah. I mean, most of the time, I wake up, I know it's a scary time. I know it is, but I'm usually able to say, it's okay. You did it. You can just go to sleep. But last night, it was like that little voice that said, the fridge, go down there. And I couldn't shut that off. I don't often have that voice, but it got me. So when it's not there, I'm sort of like, okay, I don't like it. Here I am. I'm going to go back to sleep. But, and I've had that voice before, but I think it's the fact that it's in the middle of the night. I don't have anybody to call. I feel really vulnerable. It's like me and the food are in battle, and I'm all by myself.
Wow. Yeah. When you've had the voice before, you ever noticed a time when you've been able to, even though it's the middle of the night, you've kind of talked to it, or you've ever found a way to?
Yeah. Yes, I would say so. Sometimes if I don't feel alone, so even not exactly a prayer, but even if I feel more like I'm hooked to the higher power thing, then I feel like I'm not completely alone.
Okay. Yeah. And how have you done that in the past, or how have you got hooked to the higher power? It sounds like that's something that helps.
I think I have to, before I go to bed at night, have a little conversation, which I guess you could call prayer, but it's not even that official. It's just, I'm going to bed and I'm in an okay place. It's like there's a force of negative and positive, and I'm moving into that positive place. And then,
What else? Anything else?
Well, in the middle of the night, it's harder, but if I can hook up with somebody, I connect up with somebody. The language of today, hook up means something else. In my generation, it just meant if I can connect up with somebody. And, there's a lot of meetings. I could read more. stuff, or actually probably listen to a podcast. Listen to our podcast.
Yes. That's good. That's good therapy.
Yeah.
Is that enough? Has that been helpful?
Yes, I think so. Okay. Yes, I think so.
That was only kind of a tiny bit, and I didn't really get to go into sort of. I might have gone into, but how confident you were, and what might make you one tiny bit more confident. What would you notice if you went to bed and you were kind of more confident? What would you notice tonight if the best version of yourself turned up and you were going to bed confident? What would you notice? We might have a bit more of a conversation about that.
Yeah. I mean, what I really see now, I'm speaking out of that realm, that persona. What I really see is that you're really exploring the resourcefulness as opposed to the fearfulness. And I remember I listened to a podcast where your husband spoke about his aha moment of how he just couldn't stand listening to failure after failure without this hopeful note. And when I heard that, if I can just say right now, I could so relate to that this is the story of GP work is it's just, one failure after another, but to be able to focus on the resourcefulness.
Yeah. And you meet such heroes, really, don't you? I mean, we all do, don't we? You meet people, you don't know how they're getting through, but they're getting through, and you can sort of say, how have you done that? It's a really good question. What keeps you going? How have you done that? I'm so impressed. Compliments, I think, and celebrating, as I say, the practitioner themselves noticing, wow, when you think how far you've come, all of those things that you can sort of celebrate with people. That there's evidence that the solution-focused approach is much better for practitioners in terms of burnout, because it's not on you to solve the problems of the person. You're not going away trying to be clever in between sessions thinking, I need to be really clever to kind of help this person, and what can I suggest? No, you're just asking these questions. You're drawing out their own resourcefulness. And then what you get, of course, is not that they attribute the success to you. In the end, they what they learn is that they've done it. I think it was Steve Zashages, one of the originators of Solution Focus, used to say, leave no footprints. It shouldn't be about us. It should be about the client themselves. It's a really beautiful way of practicing, and quite different from the traditional, tell me about all the problems. And it just fits so well with food addiction, because we're all unique. We've all got that unique story, unique strengths. Actually, we've got unique solutions. So none of us have the same exact food plan, timing, macro. There isn't a magic food plan, sadly, that suits us all. If only there was, we'd be out of work. But everyone has to find what they notice works for them, and that changes over time. So we all have to keep. The other lovely thing about this approach is we can do it on ourselves, because we're all still pursuing that sort of that best version of ourselves, and noticing when that person turns up, and what was it that enabled that to happen, when are we at our best. And I think it's just a lovely philosophy of life, but also a way of having conversations clinically, but also with other people. A lot of the work that David and I have done together, in fact, it started out of a conversation like that, because, as you say, Vera, he was this is about 8 or 9 years ago now, he was kind of burnt out looking back. He couldn't bear that all the tablets and the things he was trying to do for people were just getting sicker and sicker, and more overweight, more diabetes, like he was sort of thinking of retiring. And we had a conversation about, if you were to go out with a bang instead of a fizz, what might that look like? And it was at the same time as I discovered all this low carb stuff, and we kept banging on about it. And also we thought it might be fun to do something together, which we hadn't done up to that point. We had our separate jobs. So I've been a massive fan of group work and the power of group connection. So for people that I worked with who had long-term health conditions or life-limiting health conditions, the power of the group was just brilliant. And GPs never work with groups. They Dave would run a mile. He didn't like the idea at all. I said, it's fine, we'll do it. I'll help you and we'll do it. So we just did it in the evenings to help people. And all of this going around the world talking at international conferences just came out of that one conversation, really. And yeah.
And I think that's super, it's super awesome. And this was one of the reasons why I wanted to ask you on for sure, is because I have been super interested in solution-focused brief therapy for a while now. I've done a couple trips to Denver to go train, because I think that the appealing thing, right, is that it's not actually therapy. It's learning a new language. It's just learning to talk to people in a different way. And you don't have to be a therapist. You don't have to be a doctor. You can be a correctional officer. You can be a nurse. You can be a pastor. You can be whoever. And it's just a different way to talk to people to move away from the problem and toward the solution. And so when, you've talked to, when you went to Low Carb Denver in 2018 with David, and I was in love with you guys. I was like jumping up and down, and I was like, I have to go do solution focus. Definitely now I have to go do it. Like, I had been on my radar, and then you guys convinced me. And certainly you and Vera just showed why, it demonstrated why this would work with food addiction and being able to talk to somebody who's maybe struggling with that night eating or whatever, issue is coming up, that concern, so my question would be, well, first I want to plug, and just let Vera, in case you didn't know, Jen is going to be our in-service provider for our food addiction professional networking group in March. She is going to come and actually train us in how to do this with our clients. So I'm super excited about that. But that being said, are there some clients or some populations, I guess I should say, in which this method doesn't necessarily work for? And who might those people be? Like, who should we be on the lookout for?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a way of having useful conversations, I say, with anybody, with yourself. I think often what happens is that because we've had these conversations with our clients. So say that person that Vera was role playing. There's something about asking those questions that I think sticks in people's heads that then they can start asking themselves. So you're almost teaching people it's ridiculously simple. When I first encountered it, I was like, this is too simple. I'm a very clever psychologist. It can't be this simple. It's really simple. It's not particularly easy. And that was another thing that I think Steve Zashazy used to say, that it's simple, but it's not easy to keep asking these questions because it's a bit countercultural, which I like because that's another way it fits with how we are in the world, because we have to be a bit countercultural to live the way that we live. And so I quite like that solution focus is quite countercultural as well. And what's again fantastic about it is it's a kind of do no harm therapy. You're asking about people's strengths, their resources, their successes, their dreams and hopes. And there's nothing in that that's going to trigger anybody, set something off. I think obviously a lot of people who come for food addiction treatment do have trauma. That's absolutely right. And sometimes it's that's worsened the whole condition for them or really entrenched them in some ways of behavior. But I really agree with Bitten that actually, you can focus on helping people with the food situation and then kind of see what's left and see if people then need to address the trauma issues. I have seen in my practice back in the day that where you start by focusing on the trauma, whatever the person's come with, you can actually make people quite a lot worse. And if they're already in crisis, it's not a great idea, really. So solution focused is it's definitely a do no harm. You're supporting people, you're helping people to move forward just at their own pace, if that's what they want to do at that time. And you're being so respectful because it's so person centered. It's so focused on whatever they say is the goal you go with. It's not that, because I think you should.
You're essentially ending the interview on a message of hope rather than of despair and fear. So that in itself is a great way to end.
Absolutely.
But I want to get to your other tool because it's another very, very useful tool, the glycemic index infographic. And I know that David Unwin is the one who designed that, but I'm assuming that you're competent or willing to speak to it. So if you could give a brief description of what that is and why it is so amazing, and then how that might work with food addiction, because to me, it's like an amazing tool for that.
Again, so what happened was we were trying to sort of explain to people with so mostly people with type 2 diabetes that we were working with, about the amount of sugar, if you like, that's in certain foods, so that they could understand that just because it was pasta or rice, it still had a lot of sugar in it. And David got all interested in the glycemic index and the glycemic load and was sort of talking about it. And then I think he was boring one of the partners in the coffee room at work, and they said, well, just go away and, work it out and come back and explain it to me in a simple way. And so that's what he did. He got in touch with an international expert on glycemic index, Professor Jeffrey Leavesey, and they wrote a paper together, actually. So we can always put that in the notes. The calculations are in there if people want to sort of work out the teaspoons of. So what it is, it's representing the amount of sugar in foods in a way that people understand, because obviously starch digests down into glucose, but people don't really know what glucose is. This kind of white powder. Nobody really knows what glucose is. So he turned it in through the calculations into teaspoons of sugar equivalent table sugar, and then did it in a little graphic. And they've gone all around the world because people are just amazed at the idea that a banana has 6 teaspoons of sugar in it.
I got to interrupt. I've been using one of his infographics in a slide package that I've been teaching, not even knowing who he was. And then when I saw that it was you guys, was like, oh my God. It's very useful.
Yeah. So if people want to find them, and I think the paper's probably there as well. There's a charity in the UK called the Public Health Collaboration, and it's www.phcuk.org. And all of David's infographics are on there, and they're in loads of different languages now, because lovely people keep going off and translating them into Arabic and all sorts of different languages. There's loads of different languages, and there's a number of different postcards as well. I mean, there's kind of the fruit and vegetable one, because he would get annoyed that people would say, oh, people should eat more fruit and veg, and he'd say, well, it depends what you mean by fruit and veg, because some fruit and some veg are incredibly full of sugar, so they're not good choices for people with type 2 diabetes or food or sugar addiction. Yeah, so there's a number of them up there. They have, I think you guys know that they did get a bit of bad press from one of the UK Sunday papers. For some reason, decided to sort of to have a go at criticising them.
I want to talk about the pushback, but before we get to the pushback, I just want to, can I just flesh out here that with the glycemic index postcard, that will tell us where the food is sugary, and therefore we can extrapolate from that potentially more food addictive, not just problematic for diabetes, but also for food addiction.
Yes, I would say so. Yeah, because, it's the things like the tropical fruits, for example, or things like rice or pasta, which digest down into a lot of sugar. So obviously our brains and our bodies don't know the difference if we've eaten or drunk a can of Coke or, eaten 2 bananas. It's essentially physiologically it's the same in the liver and in the brain.
So then this kind of leads into your talk at Low Carb USA Boca, when you talked about low carbohydrate diet as a potential treatment for food addiction. And we kind of wanted to expand on that a little bit too, not just low carb, but also keto. Keto is like the hot term right now, right? Like people love it. They hate it. It's all over the place. And so, why is low carb and or keto? Because they are different, why might that be an ideal treatment for food addiction as far as food plans go, but also when might it not be? And you'd kind of started to alluding a little bit to it when you were talking about the keto baking and that kind of thing. But if we could just kind of have your take on keto, low carb as a treatment, and when does it kind of fall apart for food addicts?
Yeah. So obviously, because, as Vera said, it all starts with the sugar, and then it kind of goes on to other things. And end stage, it's probably most carby foods, and, sometimes we get to grains and nuts and so on. So you're obviously going to want to be abstinent from sugary foods or foods that digest down into a large amount of sugar, because they're going to be triggering for the brain. So that makes complete sense. Low carb, keto, and then it's going to be how low do you need to go? And then that's where the individual stuff comes in, is, if you get into a place where you're not having cravings and you're feeling peaceful around your food plan, and you can really happily stick to it, and just kind of happy with the results, then that's great. It may be that you need to cut out a few more things if that's not the case. The problems come, I think, when people start doing the things that are really allowed in the keto space, like keto baking. Cheat days seems to be, it's often quite a thing, isn't it? And you see it in social media a lot. And I know I go to a boot camp where they recommend low carb. Actually, amazingly, that's the sort of the eating plan that they recommend. But the trainer there has a thing about, oh yeah, cheat days are fine, kind of thing. And I'm like, oh, well, maybe for some people, but not for everybody. So it's not
Right.
about just go ahead with the cheat days. Alcohol's another problem.
Yep.
Because, say on Diet Doctor, which is a fabulous website, actually, I recommend it to loads of people, and we definitely recommend it to the patients with type 2 diabetes. But, keto drinking, sort of whiskey and vodka and stuff like that, yeah, that's not going to end well probably for most food addicts. So it's a sort of super clean keto, I sort of see it as that. And sometimes, need to be very cautious with dairy and nuts and so on and things like that. So it's like a
Right.
super clean.
Right.
Super clean
Avoid all the
plan.
processed products that are out there labeled keto. Like, don't
buy
overdo
those.
it on the fat bombs and
Yeah.
treats. And
Don't buy the Dr. Atkins bars. Don't
Yeah.
anything with sweet. I mean, that's the other thing, isn't it? It's the sweetness
Yes.
really when people are doing the keto baking. I definitely used to get into a problem with sweeteners, and then it was really, you had to give it up again. You thought, how have I done that again? Yes, I know. I just haven't had any artificial sweeteners, even if they're natural. People haven't had any of that for years.
Thank you so much about that. So those are the two tools we wanted to address, but now you had kind of alluded to the pushback. And let's talk a little bit about the clinical pushback of this benign but so powerful tool. Why would somebody have a problem with that? And, how can we deal with that? Because it's so, like you said, do no harm. Where is the harm in this?
Yeah, you mean with the sugar infographics?
Yes.
Yeah, there's no harm in it. What do you know? I don't know what's behind it. Big food. I mean, there hasn't been. So it was just this one article, really, in the Sunday papers. I think there are some researchers in the UK that just don't agree with low carb. They don't agree with it. So they didn't like the fact that NICE, which is our National Institute of Clinical Excellence, had endorsed David's infographics as part of the diabetes guidelines. They had them up there on their website, and I think there was a couple of people who don't think that low carb is a good treatment for type 2 diabetes and obesity, and I don't know exactly who they were, but they got with this journalist, and they wrote this piece, and then NICE did actually withdraw their endorsement. They said they didn't say that, as I say, the calculations are all completely right, but because they don't endorse low carb for type 2 diabetes, and they saw that some people were taking the infographics to make it look like they did endorse low carb, they said they didn't want to endorse low carb, so they've withdrawn them for now. Wow. I don't know why they don't endorse low carb, because in their own guidelines it says that people with type 2 diabetes should eat foods with low glycemic index. And
which basically endorsing low carb. Yeah.
Which ends up being low carb. So loads of people pointed that out at the time. But, it's like David says, you can only fight so many battles, really. So much progress has been made in the last 8 years. 8 years ago, we were the only people in the UK doing that work, and it was quite controversial at the time. Now he's got a Google group of over 400 doctors, all in the UK, only in the UK, who are all doing this work. There's a number of lots of other practices, big GP practices in the UK doing this work. So, things have come a really long way. I think the tide is turning.
Yeah, I think the tide is turning. In Canada, we have a low carb, sort of more women than men, GP group that are growing and growing. I think they started in the tens and hundreds and now are in the thousands. We're at the cusp. And
I think the cat is thoroughly out of the bag, and because there is a reasonably big overlap between type 2, obviously obesity, food addiction. We know from the research that there are large proportions of people with type 2 who are, they've got in that situation because they have this struggle with food. So that's helping a lot of people if they can just understand that concept of low carb. It has such a massive impact on their physical and mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And I think it's just so refreshing to hear that these groups of GPs, it's growing and growing, right? And so I'm on the Food Addiction Institute. I'm a board member on there. And I know we've reached out to you, Jen, to ask you for your help in this, going back to your research and your talk at Low Carb Boca and like just your experience for the last 8 years, just kind of these incremental steps that you've been taking. So, at the Food Addiction, we're trying to get them to recognize food addiction. And actually, it's funny enough, we just had our annual quarterly meeting today, and we had to start having this conversation of what do we name it. So that was part of the reason why I'm asking you that. The other part is, what do you see are the next steps towards, us getting recognition by the WHO, by the APA? Do we even stand a chance to get this into the DSM if there's a revision of 5 or into 6 or into the ICD-11? What are your thoughts on that? What steps should we take to be successful? Give us your inside knowledge is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I'm optimistic. Whether it'll be this one or the next one, I see that the evidence is there. Not just because I kind of want it to be. I think it's there. I think we just have to organise and we have to agree. And there's all these debates I've been working with Heidi, as you'll have spoken to Heidi today, looking at the submission to the WHO for the ICD. Yeah, we have to kind of decide exactly where we want to pitch it in terms of what their structures are, how we're going to name it, what is the key evidence that we're putting forwards and putting that in a coherent way. And I say, even if it isn't this time, I think probably it will come. I mean, the push, obviously there's pushback from there's going to be pushback from the food industry.
Yeah.
It's the same story as the smoking, isn't it? I think it's it's going to go a similar way.
Well, we are all working together. Like Robert Lustig he's just in the process of publishing a book, which he says names in the food industry, and then there we are with our bit, and so. Yes. Incrementally, we can use your model incrementally. Yes,
I think that there's reason to be hopeful. Definitely, I was going to mention Robert Lustig because I was just reading his paper that he published last year. It's just amazing. I mean, he's got a brain like a planet, hasn't he? So it's wonderful to have people like that on our side. And there's obviously all Gary Taub's stuff as well about the the case against sugar and the case for keto as well that he's just published. I think there's some fantastic stuff coming out. So I think one thing we could do with more of, and I think I said at the low carb conferences, there is so little actually on treatment outcomes. Mm-hmm. We could, but that's partly because it's not recognised, so that so people can't get funding to do the research. So it becomes a sort of self-fulfilling prophecy that there isn't any research. But that would be great to get some papers published on outcomes, I think.
Now, you have a book apparently that's coming out. Do you want to talk about that since we're on the subject of books?
Yes, how exciting. Yeah, little book called A Fork in the Road. So this idea of the sort of, that aha moment. I'm hoping that for some people, the little book will be literally the fork in the road. And I've enlisted some marvellous people to help me out. So there's Bitten, Dave Avram-Wolf, Anna Fruling, and the fabulous Georgia Eade, who are all. So I've kind of written the text. I want it to be really kind of easy, straightforward. It's kind of the book I wish had existed all those years ago. And then they've put their own comments about their own stories, but also about things like food plans and recovery. And so there's chapters on that. And then, because I am a bit of a foodie, there are recipes.
Well, what's the name of the book or the thesis of the book?
So it's really just the simple introduction to what is food addiction. Have I got it? It's for the public really. Have I got it? If so, how do I get motivated to change? So I've put the kind of GRIN stuff in there for people. And, what should I do? So we talk about, the sort of low carb keto for what the kinds of foods to eat. But I talk about, it's finding your own way with that. But there are some recipes in it. And then it's, what to do. We all relapse all this kind of carb creep we were talking about, weren't we? What to do when that happens, and then resources where to go, because it's only a little book. It's beautifully illustrated by some lovely people called Michael and Kiki Rowley, and it's just supposed to be a starter. So there's a chapter of resources, with things like, go and listen to the Food Junkies podcast and read this book. Here's some people to follow. And it just to start people off on their journey. And all the profits, I should say, are not for me, but for the public health collaboration that I mentioned that hosts David's infographics, who are also going to start campaigning for sugar addiction, food addiction being recognised. And we're, hopeful to organise conferences and things like that. So the money's going to that charity.
That's exciting. So speaking of conferences, you have an intensive coming up in Bristol in May. And I think the timing of the book and the intensive are very spot on, right? I don't know. Yeah. So talk to us about the intensive. What is it about? Who should consider registering if it isn't full? Yeah. What could they expect to get from that?
Yeah. So it should be amazing. It's a 4-day with the amazing Bitten Johnson, and she's done it a few times around the world, this intensive. I think she has done it in America before. All the food is provided. People come and stay on site, and it's for professionals and or people, just individuals struggling with food addiction. And a bit and sort of imparts all of her knowledge from A to Z in 4 days, and you come away spinning and dazed. But then you get also 6 months follow up on Zoom with Bitten and myself, and I'll be weaving in some of my stuff around, obviously, along the lines of the GRIN model. So looking at people's best hopes and helping them to kind of notice their own strengths and resources, and what little steps they feel confident in taking. So it's kind of the two of us woven together, but it's mostly Bitten's content around recognizing if you are a sugar addict, and then all the brain. She's going to do all the education about the effects on the brain and how to heal the brain and stuff like that.
Great. So where do our listeners find you, and information on how to get your book, how to pre-order it, maybe how to sign up for Bristol? Yeah. Give it to us. Everything. Where can we find you?
Okay. So I'm mostly lurking on Twitter. That's the place I lurk around most. So it's @Jen_Unwin. I do look at Facebook, but I don't use that as much for food addiction stuff. It's mostly on Twitter. There's going to be a website called forkintheroad.co.uk, and you'll be able to find information about them when the book's coming out. But also, obviously, I'll let people know so you can put it on the Facebook groups and so on. In terms of finding the information for the intensive, that's on Bitten's website, which is bittensaddiction.com.
Okay. I'll make sure to put that all in the show notes, but we just always like to ask our guests to share that with us. All right, Jen, it's the final question. It's our signature question. Are you ready?
I love this question.
If you could tell a younger version of yourself something about sugar, carb, processed food addiction, whatever we want to name it, and recovery, what would that be?
I love this question. I love everybody's answers so far. It's been so moving. And mine would be along a similar line, really, which is just, I suppose, that kind of, how old would I be when I'd want to talk to myself about this? Probably about 10, because I think I'd be able to really understand it at that age. I could have completely understood it. And that was before I got in a real pickle, I would say. So I'd be about 10, and I'd probably say, listen, it's going to be all right, because, you'll work out all about this, and somebody's going to invent the internet. And guess what? Bitten Johnson's already been born, and she's working it out ahead of time, and some other lovely people like yourselves. So it's all going to be all right. You'll work it out. And actually, although all of these things are a struggle, there's something about making your, how would you put it? Making your mess into your mission. Let's put it like that, isn't there? And there's something really lovely about that. And that'll be a blessing in the long run.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Unwin. I love how that's a great way to end. We're making our mess into our mission. Thank you very much. And Molly, do you want to close us off?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Unwin. And we will make sure to let you know when your episode is ready to rock and roll, so you can share it on Twitter and with in any newsletters or anything like that. So thank you so much.
I'm absolutely honored to have been on. And I think I love your podcast. I love it so much. I listen to it every Sunday. It's part of my regular routine now.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. It's a brilliant thing to do. It'll help so many people.
All right.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us today.
You're welcome. And I hope we can meet up when we do our International Sugar Conference. We'll all meet up.
Yes,
absolutely.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life support group, I'm Sweet Enough. You can subscribe to our show in iTunes or Stitchers. That way you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies, which is available on Amazon. If you have any additional questions, both Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals and work one-on-one with clients. You can find their websites and email addresses in the show notes. Be sure to tune in every Friday when our new episodes drop. As Vera loves to say, the power is ours.